May the 7th, 1940, at Bletchley. By tomorrow I shall have been living and working at Bletchley for exactly a month. It has been a happy month, the happiest I have spent since I last wrote in this diary on the day that the war began. How long ago that day seems now. Yet everything that happened before that day seems not only to belong to the long ago, but to some other life. Things which one did last summer, or even last autumn, seem to have happened ages and ages ago. Although the course of this war up till now has been contrary to all the predictions of the experts, one is steeped with a sickening awareness of it most of the while. For me it has meant that I have not seen Serena for over 7 months, and I do not think I am likely to see her again until this war has ended. Serena left London to go and live in Switzerland a week before the war was declared. She is still there. She wanted to be in a neutral country in the event of war breaking out, so that she might keep in touch with her sons in Germany as well as with me. I was very sad that she wished to go. It left me to face the war alone, at a time when the blessing of a loving wife would have meant so much to me. But I tried to realise the difficulties of Serena's position too, her feelings, her love for her sons, and I knew that in the event of a war her sympathies would lie with Germany rather than with my country. The government conscription scheme was quickly introduced, and it was evident that the people of my age group would not be called up for a long while, probably a year or more, by which time many people thought the war would be over. So long as it was actually impossible for me to join the army, even if I wanted to, there was no need for me to worry about not doing so, or to feel that I had shirked my duty. I went on writing short stories, amazingly unperturbed by the events of the war, although I was dreadfully hard up financially. This state of affairs continued until the beginning of November, when it was announced in the papers that, in addition to the conscription scheme, some volunteers would now be taken in certain regiments. I think my heart fell when I read this announcement, for I knew in my conscience that I ought to volunteer. I could think of 1,000 reasons for not joining up, and yet the one solitary reason for my doing so seemed to outweigh all the others. I loathed and dreaded the idea of going into the army. I could think of nothing I should hate more, nor any form of life more alien to that for which I was suited. It had nothing to do with my fear of being killed in battle, for although I had no desire to die, I thought that I should probably be less afraid of death than most people, for life itself had often frightened me horribly. I went to Max to consult him about the question of my volunteering, and more especially regarding which regiment I should apply for. The one thing I wished to avoid was to join any regiments where I should be expected to stick a bayonet into people, or to have one stuck into me. I did not think I was capable of sticking a bayonet into anybody. I knew that I would far rather be shot at myself than be bayoneted. All things considered, it seemed to me that if I were going to volunteer, it would be wise for me to join the Royal Artillery, the more especially as my family was essentially a gunner family. Max thought I ought to volunteer, and that it would be a good idea for me to join the gunners. I then went down to Farnham the next day to consult my people. Neither my mother nor my father had any hesitation in stating that they thought I ought to volunteer. I suppose it was largely a matter of family pride on their part, but it seemed to me somewhat heartless that they should have no reticence whatever in seeing me plunged into a life that must necessarily be odious to me, and which might so well mean my death. I had already been in communication with Serena on the subject of my volunteering. She very definitely thought I should do so. She had, in fact, taken it for granted that I would do so, prompted, no doubt, by some age-old feminine instinct.
On the command, hold fall, I will leave a number to take a place to the rear with the left foot, and a side face to the right with the right foot.
There are, as there always will be, many young men who regard war as a glorious adventure. I certainly do not belong to this group. I regard war as a disgrace to our civilization. Furthermore, it is quite impossible for me to feel any real enmity towards Germany, for I know well that I have spent the happiest days of my life there. I have some very good friends there. My own wife is German. I know in my heart that neither the English nor the German people wanted this war, whatever the ambitions of the statesmen might be, and however much mutual hatred a prolonged war must inevitably produce. To me, the war was a ghastly tragedy. So I went to the recruiting station at Acton one morning at the beginning of November to enlist in the Royal Artillery, for it had been announced in the papers that they were among the regiments taking volunteers. It is quite a long journey by underground out to Acton, and the recruiting depot was 20 minutes' walk from the station. I felt in a high state of nerves as I made that journey. Even when I came at last to the recruiting depot and saw a notice indicating the entrance for volunteers, I walked slowly right round the building before making up my mind to go in. I did go in at last. I waited in the queue for some minutes, and then glanced at the blackboard perched on an easel, on which were chalked the names of the regiments still accepting volunteers. Suddenly I noticed that the Royal Artillery was not chalked up on that list. I made inquiries with one of the sergeants. He informed me that there were no further vacancies in the Royal Artillery for the time being. He advised me to return later, giving me the impression that volunteers were not really wanted. I decided to take the sergeant's advice, and I left the building to return to London. And so I returned for a while to my short story writing, my solitary walks in the park, my occasional visits to theatres, galleries and cinemas. I was very lonely, but often quite happy. For once, I was living a life of peace. My chief worry was the usual one of lack of money, more especially of providing the money for Serena, whose demands on my finances were as severe as ever. It was inevitable that, being thus alone once more, I should think much about my marriage and my relations with Serena. My thoughts on the subject were pretty bitter, and were to grow far more so as time went on. I thought of the Serena whom I had loved so deeply, and in whom I had had such implicit confidence for so many years before our marriage. and in contrast, of the Serena whom our marriage had revealed to me. She wrote many letters from Switzerland, letters which I had learnt to know so well from the past, telling me how much she loved and missed me. At times, it was difficult not to believe in these letters, as I had formerly believed in the letters she wrote to me when I was on my own in Singapore. But then I could not help remembering how little she had shown me of that love during the time she had been with me. When I saw Serena off at Victoria Station, I wondered whether I should ever see her again. About 10 days after my first visit to the recruiting station, I returned on the morning of November the 14th, 1939. It was a fine, sunny morning, and as I walked from the station at Acton, I remember looking at a field by the side of the road and thinking, when I pass this way on my return, I shall no longer be a free man. Instead of being called up a month later, as had been stated in the newspapers, I was actually to report at 3 p.m. the very next day to start my duties as a soldier. This was a tremendous shock, as it gave me no time to make any private arrangements. What have I let myself in for? I kept murmuring as I finally left the recruiting station. It is only fair to add, however, that I had been asked whether I would be prepared to start the next day, and with one of those mad, inexplicable impulses, I heard myself answering yes. It would have been possible for me to have been called up a month later if I had said no, but I was so confused by then that I scarcely knew what I was doing. I do not remember ever having felt in such a state of nerves. As I walked back to my room along Piccadilly in the darkness of the blackout, I cried the whole way from sheer nerves. Back in my room, I flung myself on my bed, and my tears flowed so fast that I had to use my bath towel instead of a handkerchief to dry them. It seemed to me at that moment as though I had given up all that mattered to me in the world, as though the life I had lived and known had ended, perhaps forever. What a fool I have been, I thought. What a fool. Life on our gun site continued in its rather monotonous round. Monotony was our main enemy. One longed to fire the gun, but during those early months of the war there was absolutely nothing to fire at. To relieve the monotony, we even took up gardening and started growing our own vegetables on our site. The rest of the day's work consisted of an endless round of gun drills, gun cleaning, hut cleaning, path sweeping, and such like duties. I certainly felt that I was pretty well wasting my life there. Occasionally the monotony was relieved by rather good parties at a little pub, and sometimes by local dances, which were very good fun. One day a really exciting incident occurred, so far as I was concerned. A telephone message came through from Battery HQ to our site to say that a telegram had come from the War Office to say that I was to take the next train to town and report at a certain room at the War Office. I was enormously thrilled by this. I gathered that there was quite a flutter at Battery HQ among the officers. There was I, whose name was scarcely known to some of the officers, suddenly being summoned by telegram to an interview at the War Office. It was a pretty good moment for me. The lieutenant accordingly asked me if I knew why the War Office wished to see me. I said yes, I thought I did. I had, in fact, had a rather surprising experience during the week I'd spent in London on sick leave. By the oddest of chances, I had received a telegram forwarded on from the address in Cornwall Gardens where I had been living before the war. It was an unsigned telegram and requested me to go the next day to see a person whom I had never heard of at an address which conveyed nothing to me whatever. So the next day, I went to the address as requested. I asked for the man whose name was given in the telegram. When I met him, he said, "Oh yes, but you don't really want to see me, they just use my name. If you go into that room, Miss X, the secretary, will look after you." The whole matter was becoming more and more mysterious. I wondered who they might be. This man said he could not tell me anything more, but that they would. I went into the room indicated and saw Miss X. She said that she could not tell me anything either, but that I would shortly be interviewed by them in a room below. Eventually, I was taken to a room on the floor below, where they were assembled. I still had no idea why I had been requested to go there, but any questions I asked on this and similar subjects were either ignored or evaded. They, on the other hand, asked me a great many questions indeed, including a great number about my general experience, and I was also tested regarding certain qualifications, which it is not advisable to disclose. During the course of this interview, it became apparent that there was some appointment in question, but they did not give me any details as to what it might be. I was, however, given to understand that it would be an exceptionally interesting and very secret one. It all sounded most thrilling. At length, the interview ended. I hoped more than anything in the world that I might be selected for this hush-hush appointment, even though they would not give me any idea as to what it might be, or even as to how or why they had got in touch with me. Actually, I had gained some idea of the why, but none of the how. And so I left them after the most mysterious and exciting interview I had ever had. Then, this telegram from the War Office suddenly came to my battery HQ, telling them to send me to the War Office for an interview by the next train. I duly reported to the War Office in London. I had an agreeable interview with Wing Commander W. He was the man who had the final say in the appointment, and from what he told me, it seemed that he was going to give me the job. In fact, he told me so. I was thrilled in every way, and the salary was to be rather more than I had ever earned in England before. I left the Wing Commander feeling that a new life had begun for me. I returned to my war site highly elated. I had been told that the matter would be cleared up in about 10 days, but it was 6 weeks before this finally happened. These were the longest 6 weeks I ever spent in the army. Every time the telephone bell rang on my gun site, I hoped it might be to summon me away. As the weeks drew on, I began to despair and to think that nothing was going to come of it after all, and that I should be doomed to spend the rest of the war as a gunner. It was agony. Then I got a letter from the Air Ministry informing me that I had been appointed to the Directorate of Intelligence at the Air Ministry. It sounded too fantastic for words. I could scarcely believe it. The arrangements for my release indefinitely from the army had been completed. I was to take up the new appointment in 48 hours' time. They were a frantic 48 hours for me. I had already taken leave of those on my gun site, and had been given a really touching farewell by them. At last, the great moment came when I had completed all the necessary formalities and could leave Enfield Lock and my battery forever. That final journey on the train from Enfield Lock to London in my own clothes, for the first time in 6 months, knowing that I had left the army forever to take up this thrilling appointment in the Air Ministry Intelligence. That final journey I count among the happiest experiences in my life. I had a carriage to myself and was so happy that I sang all the way to London. Above all, for the first time since I had joined the army, I felt free again. It was heavenly.
First, and let us remember those who will not come back.
May the 8th, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. This day, so long awaited, has come at last. So eventful have these past days been, bringing the news of the deaths of both Hitler and Mussolini, that the actual conclusion of hostilities in Europe has come as something of an anticlimax. The final news had been expected daily, almost hourly, so that it came as no surprise. It came exactly 24 hours after everybody had already known that the surrender had been signed by the Germans. I was at work when we were informed of this, and it was astonishing to me how little excitement or reaction it produced among my colleagues. We carried on quietly with our work as though nothing special had happened. The whole country remained at their wireless sets, awaiting Churchill's speech. They went on waiting until about 8 o'clock, when it was stated that Churchill would not make his announcement until 3 p.m. today.
We're interrupting programs to make the following announcement. It is understood that in accordance with arrangements between the three great powers, an official announcement will be broadcast by the Prime Minister at 3 o'clock tomorrow. In view of this fact, tomorrow, Tuesday, will be treated as Victory in Europe Day.
Sitting in my room in my billet in Bletchley yesterday evening, listening to the various news broadcasts, I found it impossible to appreciate the significance of the tremendous news of the day. It seemed to be just another of the hundreds of evenings on which I had sat there alone. No sign anywhere of rejoicing or excitement. Just a horse and some sheep with their newly born lambs quietly chewing the spring green grass in the fields onto which my window looks out. I could not even feel particularly excited myself, although I wanted to. It may be that I had too many other less happy thoughts and problems at the back of my mind, above all the question of my next job and all the uncertainty of the future. At length I decided that it was not good to remain alone in my room on this evening, and, as the sun was still shining, I got out my bicycle and cycled out to the fountain. I hoped that I might meet some friends there, and in any case I would drink some beer in celebration of the victory, and then perhaps I should be able to feel the things I wanted to feel. It proved to be a very happy decision, and after a little while, I joined up with some friends from the park and had an exceedingly gay and happy evening, which did not end until 2:30 this morning. It was the most excellent party, and I have not enjoyed myself so much for a long time. By this morning, most of the houses and shops in Bletchley had flags hung out. This was the only indication in this exceedingly dreary little town that anything unusual had occurred. Listening this evening to the wireless broadcasts of how London had been celebrating today, with recordings of the vast cheering crowds outside Buckingham Palace and in Whitehall, I greatly wished that I had been able to be there, where I belong. Yet it is good to see all these flags outside the houses here, and as I cycled through the town, I, who have never bought a flag in my life, wondered what had prompted all the inhabitants of Bletchley to buy them. Was it that they felt it was expected of them by their neighbours? Or was it, and I rather think it was, some deeper and finer motive of loyalty and good citizenship that had prompted this action? Was it the only way they knew how to express certain deep but simple and rather noble feelings? If it was, then I like them better than I've been able to like them as a community before.